everybody. This is the Fun Hammond Curtis Museum, and we're at the P-40 Warhawk Restoration Shop. Actually, it's a reconstruction. It will not be flying, it'll just be for display. So we will go inside. As we come in the door here, to your right is our motto. Semper progredium, which means always progressing. We may be progressing a very tiny amount, but we try to progress every time we come in. When we come in further, we are in the 1940s. We have our 48 Star Old Glory, which was actually my grandfather's. The shop has 1940s swing music going at all times. What we're in was a storage barn. We had to take everything out of it that we had stored in here. We had to remove everything out. We had to put in electricity, we had to drop the ceiling, we had to insulate it, we had to put in a furnace and heat it, and we have a small air conditioner in the summertime when we really need it. I forgot to say that my name is Richard Segrist. Everybody calls me Dick. The restoration shop director's name is Art Wilder, and he and I have been on this project for over 7.5 years. So it went from pieces that are laying around here on the table and such, and we pieced together over 7.5 years an aircraft that is getting closer and closer as we go. So I have to give props where they must go, and it goes to Mr. Wilder. Without his energy and I don't know how you put it.
Leadership, maybe? Leadership?
Leadership, yes, and know-how over the 25 years that he's been here, that the progress that the restoration shop has made so far. So, as you come in, we have our work area. The aircraft is a P-40 Warhawk. They were all built in Buffalo, New York. All 13,760 odd. That was the third highest American production run for fighter or pursuit aircraft. P stands for pursuit. In 1936-37, Curtis Wright had a P-36 Mohawk. That aircraft had a Wright radial engine, air-cooled, and it was basically this airframe with a radial engine on it. And in 1937, the Army Air Corps had new specifications for a new pursuit plane. They were that it was to incorporate or use the Allison V1710 engine. It had to have armor plating for protection of the pilot. It had to have self-sealing fuel tanks, and it had to have 50 caliber armament. So in 38, Mr. Berlin, lead designer at Curtis Wright in Buffalo, modified the P-36 Mohawk into the P-40 Warhawk. So a lot of the tooling and everything was already there. They just had to modify it to the new specifications. There was one other specification I forgot. On the engine, they wanted a single-speed, single-stage supercharger. Supercharger is driven off the crank mechanically, where a turbocharger runs off the exhaust gases coming out of the engine. So they requested that what do you call it? They requested in the specifications that the supercharger be a single speed, single stage with performance up to 15,000 feet. The feeling was at that time in the Army Air Corps that pursuit planes would only be needed at low altitude performance because the bombers of the time were actually faster than the pursuit planes. So they didn't specify high altitude performance. This plane could get to altitude, but it took a lot longer. And you didn't want to get into a turning dogfight battle at that altitude because you didn't have any reserve power. You know, weren't pushing enough fuel and air through the engine. An engine's horsepower is not its displacement, it's how efficiently you can force air in and out of the engine. So now this aircraft was designed in 1938 when the British came calling in 1939. They wanted aircraft wherever they could get them. This was the only plane, pursuit plane, that could be ramped up production quickly and supplied to the British. They knew its limitations. The limitations were its altitude and performance at high altitude. And unfortunately, the Battle of Britain Air War was fought at higher altitudes, and they did need quick ground to altitude performance, which a two-stage, two-speed supercharger on their Hurricanes and Spitfires gave them. But what this aircraft did, it gave them the flexibility to use these aircraft in the Commonwealth, the Dominions of New Zealand, Australia, South Africa, and Canada. And it was used to great effect in the Desert Air Force in North Africa. So it freed up their production of Spitfires and Hurricanes, which was critical at that time to stay at home to defend England. This aircraft is a 30s design, so it has a very strong wing. It has 5 main spars and 2 auxiliary spars. In contrast, a later war P-51 Mustang has 2 main spars and that's it. It is a quite large pursuit plane for the era. It is quite roomy in the cockpit. A Messerschmitt is tiny compared to this. And I've heard German pilots say that you didn't get into a Messerschmitt, you put it on. And if you've ever seen one, they are tiny and it is tight getting in. So in North Africa, this plane, and in the Pacific, with the Aussies and the New Zealanders, most of the combat was, and in China, most of the combat was at lower altitudes. So you didn't have the performance problem with the high altitude problem with the supercharger. And so this aircraft did great duty in North Africa and the South Pacific. Now if we come forward a little bit, you can see the iconic shark's mouth with tongue and eye. This would be indicative of the CBI Theater, which is the China-Burma India Theater, and would be indicative of the AVG, American Volunteer Group. Now, the shark's teeth actually came from a British squadron in the Desert Air Force in North Africa. I think it was 112 Squadron, and it was famous in England for being the Shark Squadron. And they got it from a couple Messerschmitt 110s that had it on their plane. So it went through different iterations. In England, it's known as 112 Squadron, Desert Air Force. In America, everybody recognizes it as the Flying Tigers, or the AVG, American Volunteer Group in China. We questioned whether this aircraft had that on it. The gentleman who got it out of the swamp in Florida did mention that they saw a faint outline of shark's teeth. We questioned it and talked with the Air Force Museum at Dayton, and they said yes, squadrons, training squadrons did leave some of their aircraft with the shark teeth on as a morale booster, and also to sort of make the pilots cognizant of the fact that they are getting into a high-performance aircraft. And this, in the United States, in 1945, when this aircraft crashed in a mid-air collision, the P-40s were being used as high-performance advanced trainers. They built 13,760 of them. A lot of them were lend-lease to the Allies. A lot were used in combat, and they still had plenty in the United States, so they used them as high-performance advanced trainers. And that's what this aircraft was used when it crashed. And I think that's quite a bit for one day. And hopefully next week we'll go into how this plane came to be where it crashed. So look forward to that.